Okay. Good morning. Welcome to our forum on decarbonizing the manufacturing sector in New York. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Julie Ty, and I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. NYLCV Education Fund's mission is to educate, engage, and empower New Yorkers to be effective advocates for the environment. We are happy to be joined by our event partners, the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia Law School. We also want to thank our series sponsor, Con Edison. This forum is the fifth in our series on the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. We held forums focusing on offshore wind transmission, buildings and energy efficiency, transportation, and natural resources. And we're planning to hold one in the future to talk about waste. The breadth of the CLCPA is economy-wide. It legally commits to New York to achieve emissions reductions of 85% across all sectors by 2050 with a goal of carbon neutrality. Through this series, our goal is to dive deeper into how we're going to achieve those ambitious climate goals in a way that is effective, efficient, and equitable. We also want to build public awareness, educate New Yorkers on climate policy, and develop recommendations for how to meet those objectives. The state is off to a great start with bold clean energy goals of 70% renewable energy by 2030 and 100% clean energy by 2040. New York also already has some clean transportation and clean energy policies in place, and NYLCV and other advocates are working to advance others this year, such as a clean fuel standard for transportation and extended producer responsibility to reduce waste. But today we're here to talk about opportunities and challenges to decarbonizing our manufacturing sector. This area is different from other sectors like transportation and buildings because most New Yorkers don't encounter factories and manufacturing plants every day, but is responsible for nearly $80 billion of economic output statewide. Manufacturing is the third largest contributor to climate change nationally. Emissions from manufacturing come primarily from burning fossil fuels for energy and chemical reactions for producing raw materials. It will take an all-of-the-above strategy to reduce pollution from manufacturing. Technologies like carbon capture, combined heat and power, and renewable energy must come into play. And industries can also work to become more efficient. Today, we'll discuss some examples of manufacturing companies that are working to reduce their emissions. We'll hear about costs, programs available to provide assistance, and examples from other states. To guide our discussion, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this morning's panels, Dr. Julio Friedman. Dr. Friedman is a senior research scholar at the Center for Global Clean Energy Policy at Columbia University, where he leads a new initiative in carbon management. He's one of the most widely known and authoritative experts in the US on carbon removal, including CO2 drawdown from the air and oceans, CO2 conversion and use, such as carbon to value and CO2 recycling, and carbon capture and sequestration. His expertise includes industrial decarbonization, hydrogen production and use, conventional and unconventional oil and gas systems, and international clean energy systems, including in China, Europe, and the Middle East. Dr. Friedman received his bachelor's and master's degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, aka MIT, and his PhD in geology from the University of Southern California. Welcome, Dr. Friedman.
It's truly a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Thanks to the League of Conservation Voters in New York, and of course, delighted to be doing this in partnership with the Sabin Center on Climate Law at Columbia University. We have an extraordinary set of panelists here to discuss a set of important topics today. So thank you for joining us. Let me start by just making a very brief set of opening comments. I wanted to underscore two things that are central to the work. One of them is just the nature of climate change and the urgency by which we must confront it. It is clear that we require much greater ambition to make progress quickly. We are already witnessing climate change, its impacts are being felt. And the science is unambiguous and clear, and it is already affecting trade policy, US competitiveness, and so forth, in terms of creating green products. It is also the case that we face substantial challenges in achieving that in the manufacturing sector. These challenges include a limited set of technology options. They include challenges associated with cost that affect consumers, as well as trade and competitiveness. And there are challenges associated with equity, with job quality, and with just transition. Thankfully, I don't have to talk about these things by myself. We have a terrific panel, which I will introduce briefly now. In alphabetical order, it's my pleasure to welcome Heather Britchetti. Heather is the president and CEO of the Business Council of New York State. They advocate for the New York business community. Ms. Britchetti joined the council in 2007 as Vice President of Government Affairs. Prior to the Business Council, she was a consultant and lobbyist for Powers and Company, working on issues that included the Javits Center expansion in New York's Yankee Stadium. Next, I'd like to welcome Luc Clement. Luc is the Managing Director at Clement Materials and Clement Group, a family-owned business founded in Troy, New York in 1915 with a focus on supply of ready-mix concrete, asphalt, sand, gravel, quarry stone, mulch, compost, topsoil, etc., with over 25 locations in New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Connecticut. The companies operate under trade names Bonded Concrete, Troy Sand and Gravel, Century Aggregates, 21st Century Concrete, and Material Sand and Gravel. It's my pleasure to also welcome Matt Roberts. Matt is the founder and co-owner of Sherrill Manufacturing, which is the only manufacturer of stainless steel flatware left in the United States. Sherrill Manufacturing purchased the domestic manufacturing assets of Oneida Limited in 2005. It is 100% commitment to made in the USA. The Liberty Tabletop brand is also working with the fellow Made in USA small businesses to provide a one-stop shop for all your kitchenware needs, and is celebrating over 30 years in the flatware business. Matt is a member of the Madison County Board of Supervisors and represents the city of Oneida as well. I'm also pleased to welcome Randy Wolkin. Randy is the president and CEO of MANSI, the Manufacturers Association of New York. It serves over 330 companies, employing more than 50,000 people in the state within a 26-county region in central and upstate New York. He is also president and CEO of the Manufacturers Alliance of New York, a coalition of manufacturing groups representing over 2,500 companies and over 425,000 manufacturing employees in the state. Randy joined MANSI in 2001 and has dedicated the past 20 years to improving the business climate in central and upstate New York. He is also currently the co-chair of the Regional Economic Development Council of Central New York and the chair of the Brady Faith Center. Last but not least, Mr. John Williams, who serves as the Vice President for Policy and Regulatory Affairs for NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Mr. Williams is responsible for providing oversight and guidance to energy policy development for NYSERDA and New York State, including guidance for the scoping plan development of the Climate Action Council. He also sees the Energy and Environmental Analysis Team that provides economic analysis and scientific research to best inform policymakers in energy and environmental issues. John also currently serves as the vice chair of the board of directors of the National Association of State Energy Officials. Thank you again, all. I know that was a mouthful, but it represents the quality, experience, depth, and commitment in our team today. In that context, I'd like to start with a rather straightforward question to everyone, and I will prompt you in round robin around my screen, starting first with Luc. What are the biggest challenges you face today in decarbonizing manufacturing? What is top of your mind? Why don't we start with Luc, and then I'll go to Heather.
Well, I think as a small to mid-sized business, one of the challenges is adding, would be the staff to support kind of carbon neutrality program, department, that kind of thing. So, but what we can do at a macro level, we can pursue what I call, I guess, carbon de-intensification. So as a practical matter, we can look at carbon mitigations. So we do look at things like switching from, let's say, using diesel as a fuel source to natural gas. Again, not getting us to carbon neutrality, but those types of things. And so we also recently, and I think a little more aggressively, looked at moving, and not looked at, we actually did it. We implemented it in Fishkill, New York. We moved from a diesel excavator to an electric dredge, and that was a pretty big move on our part. So I think, as a small mid-sized company, we can look at those types of things, but we, having dedicated resources, looking at it every day would be probably one of the first and foremost challenges for us.
Thank you. And that is not said enough, actually. The human capital challenge, the need for staff and experts is very much real. Heather, to you, and then to Matt.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to start off by just saying something that might be obvious to everyone, but sometimes the question comes up, well, why do we care about manufacturing? And manufacturing is really critical to the state and national economy. Manufacturing jobs are generally higher paying than median wages. The multiplier impact of having manufacturing present is very, very intense. It's very beneficial to local economies. And lastly, we learned a lot about what happens when you don't have good supply chain and strong manufacturing networks that are domestic. And so it's really, really important that we figure this out for manufacturers, because they are really a critical part of the state's economy and very, very important to keeping us a great place to live and work. And so decarbonizing manufacturing, and Randy is really the expert on this, but one of the big challenges is there's certainly some processes that cannot be done with electrification, right? So things like making glass, anything that's energy or heat intensive, we don't currently have technology that is going to be able to replace the current processes. And then you add to that the fact that they're all very integrated. So if you change one part of the process, you're going to have to change other parts. The facilities themselves and the equipment that's used is very expensive. It has a long lifetime, sometimes more than 50 years. So we need to make sure that we consider all of this as we go toward decarbonizing processes. And with that, I'll stop, and hopefully Randy can add to what I had to say.
Thank you. Before Randy, though, let's go to Matt and then Randy.
Right. To sort of go off of what Heather just mentioned, one of the interesting things, and one of the reasons why I've been a champion for manufacturing since I started working at Oneida in 1991, was that not only do we have a diverse, we need diverse jobs because we have diverse people. There are people that don't want to go to college, don't want to get their PhD, that don't want to be, they want to do certain jobs. And having manufacturing gives those people an opportunity to be part of the economy. And we lost a lot of that a number of years ago. So that's a really huge, a diverse opportunity with diverse people definitely helps. And that really doesn't have a lot to do with this discussion. But from our standpoint, now we're basically an internet company. So we don't do a lot of shipping and receiving except for our raw materials. My big concern is, because we compete with globally on the internet, is what's going to happen to the companies like the U.S. Postal Service, FedEx, and UPS if need to decarbonize. What is going to happen to us? Now we have we don't have a lot of equipment that uses a lot of carbon, although we've gone from years ago we had coal-fired boilers, we went to oil, and now we heat totally with natural gas. We don't have any electric heating because it's just too expensive for us. The other thing is, there's carbon in lubricants, there's carbon in supplies. We've made a very conscious effort to buy local. So most of our supplies outside of steel come from local people, Utica, Syracuse, Sherburne, New York, which many of you may not know where Sherburne is. They do all our packaging. So my concern is, if we're trying to get all of that, decarbonize the whole process, there's a number of parts that we really don't even know what we're going to do if we can't use them.
Important points for sure. With that, we're going to go to Randy. Hopefully Heather will come back in a moment, but in the meantime, Randy, the stage is yours.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. And this really is a great panel. I appreciate being here. As Heather mentioned, it's manufacturing is absolutely critical in New York State. We're one of the largest manufacturing states in the country. Many people may not realize that, but we are a top 10 manufacturing state, a huge amount of economic wealth and opportunity with great paying jobs. So it's really critical that we actually meet this challenge. You mentioned just some of the challenges related to manufacturing. So it is a very large challenge, and we need to do so while remaining globally competitive. And that probably is one of the most significant elements of the manufacturing sector. You're in a global competition, and you need to be competitive with customers not only in Indiana, but in India. So that's one of the bigger challenges, I think, facing especially small, medium manufacturers that are, many of them privately owned, have been longtime generational operators in New York, is how do we maintain these wonderful jobs, these family supporting opportunities in our state while moving forward with the challenges. I think we all agree we need to move forward. We need to find an aggressive way to do so. As mentioned by some of the others, and I'm sure we'll spend more time on the technology, will be the big question. How quickly can we have the technology, implement it, and adapt it while remaining competitive? So I'm a big believer, having done this for 2 decades now, that the manufacturing sector is up to the challenge. I've watched them over time respond effectively to being competitive and also put out great products and wrapping those products in great services. So I look forward to this conversation.
Marvelous. Last but not least, John Williams from NYSERDA. What are the biggest challenges we face?
Yeah, thank you. There's quite a number of challenges. And I think, the other panelists have done a really great job at identifying, what I had thought about as the most significant challenges. I think first is clearly there is just a technology challenge. And I think we all have to understand that maybe also to add to the characterization of manufacturing in New York as well. Like the thing is that, it's a very heterogeneous population in terms of who our manufacturers are and what the manufacturers are producing. What that means in terms of technology development is that there's no kind of singular technology strain that we can be looking at. It's going to look like a lot of different types of technology applications, and then they're all going to be uniquely formed to each of the facilities that we have operating in New York and want to keep operating in New York and even maybe attract more operating in New York. So I think that is necessarily a challenge. It's getting those technologies to a point of readiness so that they can be implemented readily and implemented economically. And that is something that we need to have focused attention on as we think about decarbonization and those technology applications. I think the other issue is something that both Randy and Matt were really touching on too, is the fact of where does this technology, this manufacturing center function and where does it operate? And we need to make sure that as we're looking at our policy advancements in New York, these manufacturers are in national markets, they're in international markets. And we need to make sure that as we are advancing in New York, we need to see advancements happening nationally and internationally. We do like to go to this concept of emissions leakage as a threat to our environment policy, but it really is also quite a threat to our economic policies as well in New York. So we need to make sure that as New York is making advances, that we can influence advances that we need in other parts of the country, other parts of the world. So New York manufacturing retains its competitiveness and provides those values to New York State that we know that it does.
Outstanding, thank you. And welcome back, Heather. Glad to have you rejoin us. It does indeed make sense to have both greater ambition, but also humility about how difficult this is. I'd like to start the discussion first with the glass half full. We'll get to the glass half empty part in a moment. But first, what does a clean energy transition look like to New York manufacturers? What would actually, and as part of that discussion, we can also talk about examples that companies have already taken on. Some of you have already volunteered things you've done, but let's start actually first with Randy again. What does you think a clean energy transition looks like for New York manufacturers? What would it involve?
Well, the good news is it looks a lot like many of the progress made in clean air and clean water in the past. New York State manufacturing is the cleanest it's been ever. It continues to make significant investments in cleaner operations, more efficient operations, less energy usage. It's not only is it the moral thing and the right thing to do, it's the economical thing to do. They want to make those investments so they can be more competitive in a global market. So I think you want to tap into that innovative spirit and the engineering marvels already accomplished by many of the manufacturing companies in the state of New York. I mean, some of the greatest producers of products of all time have come out of New York State. So we have a great tradition and a legacy. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why I have such confidence in their ability. They have found ways to make great products and to be on the forefront of doing that. So I really think that we need to tap into the abilities that they already have. And I've seen that in company after company, their ability to confront a challenge, to use great engineering principles and really lean and other types of state-of-the-art manufacturing techniques to be successful. So let's tap into that willingness, desire, and I'll call it frontier-focused experiences of we want to get things done and we want to do it well. And they take great pride in being parts of their communities. The vast majority of manufacturers are small, medium in this state as well as the rest of the country, and they take great pride in being New Yorkers, and they take great pride in being a part of solutions. So that to me is a part of figuring this out as we tap into their desire to take on a challenge and to be successful. The other piece is they're really good at analyzing situations. So as we look at the technologies, the ones that are currently available and the ones that are pretty exciting that we believe are still coming, how do we use the technologies we have to make great progress, and then what's right around the horizon? And I think John will talk more about that too. There's a lot of technologies that we think are coming, maybe not quite here yet.
Excellent. John, before I go to you with the same question, I would encourage people, again, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A chat function or the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We are getting questions as well in the chat function. We are clocking those, but it's best if you do through the Q&A. So again, John, from your perspective, you've got the lens of the state government here. What does clean energy transition look like for manufacturing?
Yeah, and what maybe I'll do is I'll point to some analysis work that we conducted as we launched the Climate Action Council process. And, really the intent of that was to provide levels of parameters around different sectors of the economy, each of which we need to make advancements towards getting that 85%, ultimately the 85% emission reduction goal by 2050. And while that 30-year timeframe seems like a lot, when we think about the manufacturing sector, it's really quite fast. And I think even Heather was identifying, decisions are being made today that we will still be realizing the benefits of those decisions as far out as 2050. So we need to be thinking about how we're looking at the entire time scale between now and 2050 and thinking about trajectories of decarbonization. When we looked at our analysis, really when we think about 2020 to 2030, the primary opportunity space for manufacturers is really in energy efficiency. And a good number of manufacturers really are looking at both of their kind of buildings-based or system-based types of processes and identifying energy efficiency opportunities there. Looking at even process energy efficiency and how changes in different types of technology applications in and of itself can provide reduced energy demand. And both of these can have economic opportunities. So I think the trick with looking for that energy efficiency opportunity space over the next 10 years is to do so in a way that the manufacturers themselves can think about their own capital investment cycles. How can we capture what provides economic opportunity, but in the long run also will be providing a decarbonization pathway for that manufacturer. When we think about the long term, say if we're looking at 2030 to 2050, that's really when we need to start seeing kind of advanced technology options start to come into play. And that is going to be the trick. And it's sort of new technologies coming in, but also getting on a ramp to scalability for a lot of those technologies. And it could be looking at, if we have very intense activities, we might need to think about carbon capture as opportunity spaces where we still do need some fuel-based input. As Heather had mentioned, that there's a lot of very energy intense activity that we do and does require energy intense energy sources. Whether that's going to look like potential hydrogen, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to best understand what the value proposition might be there. That might be another one. But I also think, we need to understand that there are likely to be emergent electrification opportunities, which will provide decarbonization to this sector, particularly as our electric grid is decarbonizing over the same time period. And we also do need to think about potential for other renewable fuels coming into the sector as well. So there are a number of different outcomes that that our analysis had initially shown. A lot of work, though, needing to get from here to making sure that we have viable technology solutions that can contribute to that decarbonization in this particular sector.
Thank you. There's a lot to parse in there, and we'll be coming back to it. We've got time. First, though, I'd like to give the other panelists an opportunity to discuss not only what they are doing, but what they've seen other companies doing in New York, and where do they see opportunities. Oh, Heather just dropped off again. Luke, you'd already mentioned going to an electric dredger. You'd already mentioned substitution of diesel for compressed natural gas. What are other things that you have seen yourself doing, and what are other things that you've seen people in your same sector or adjacent sectors doing to use more clean energy and reduce emissions?
Thank you. Yeah, so some additional things are recycling. So recycling in our industry, for example, asphalt, the reuse of asphalt, the stuff that you take off the old roadway can be recycled into new asphalt. That saves both on the use of the tar, liquid asphalt, and it also saves on the aggregate. So the aggregate is an energy intensive product. So by recycling there, that's been a very advantageous. In our ready mix business, cement, as we know, has a large carbon footprint. We do use fly ash, which is kind of a twofer, which is kind of going away a little bit now. Well, not a little bit, going away in a big way, which is fly ash used to come from the coal plants. And increasingly that is going away, but fly ash can be used as a displacement product to reduce your ability or reduce the amount of cement required in concrete. A new frontier that we're looking at, we're seeing people moving into it. It is an issue in New York State, is glass, recycling glass, disposal of there are certain glass streams that are not as reusable as others, and that glass can be crushed into a powder that could also be used as a cement displacement product. So those kinds of ideas, I think, are out there, and we're definitely pursuing several of them. And I think this new one on the glass recycling is very, very promising.
Excellent. Well volunteered. Matt, to you, and then to Heather, again, the same question. Sort of, what are examples? You've already provided some from your own company. Are there others that you see, and are there others that you see groups in your sector taking on?
Well, we do a lot of recycling. Actually, about 85% of the stainless steel that we purchase is already recycled. I mean, that can be recycled probably infinitely. The other thing, and this is just because of the location we're at, we do get our electricity from Niagara Falls. So we're one of the public utilities, us, Salve, I think Messina, there's a couple other places. We try to use that as a marketing tool. But recycling as much as possible. We've done a lot of insulating of our facility. Obviously, when we polish our flatware, we use dust collectors. so that all of the dust that it gets collected and put in a landfill, that turns over the air in our facility about 3 times an hour. So what we've done in order to mitigate that, so you're sucking the heat out, is we've installed a lot of infrared heaters. So we're heating the objects, we're heating the ground, heating the machinery, heating the people. It makes for a more comfortable space, and it saves a lot of energy because you're not heating the air that you're sucking up. So those are some of the things we've done to save energy, along with outside of the decarbonization side is we've gotten rid of a lot of the chemicals that we would consider dangerous. I think Randy mentioned this. My kids went to high school and school with all of the coworkers in the factory. That's what small businesses do. We live in the communities in which we work. So we care a lot more about what we're doing because it's a legacy that our children and grandchildren are going to have to live with. So those are a few of the things we're doing right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me start here by saying that we've heard some pretty ambitious and difficult things here. 85% emission reduction by 2050 is not something where you can just recycle or efficiency your way out of it. And at some point, there's real capital costs and operating expenses associated even with efficiency and conservation. I was hoping that first Heather and then others might talk about some of the challenges in terms of cost and competitiveness that is associated with this drive for decarbonization.
Sure. And I'm sorry, I'm having obviously some internet challenges today. I'm not sure what it is, but anyways, yeah, obviously one of the big challenges that is presented by the CLCPA and its goals is that we don't really know yet what the costs are going to be. So if we were to try to structure something that would help manufacturers navigate the costs, try and accommodate them to some degree, we'd have to know what the added costs are going to be at the outset. And as I mentioned, some of these facilities have a lifetime of 50 plus years. So the planning goes out very, very far in advance. If there's uncertainty about what the costs are going to be, it may drive companies to invest in areas where there's less uncertainty. And that's sometimes referred to as leakage. Leakage can mean emissions, but it can also mean loss of investment and loss of jobs, or choices made to locate where there is more certainty moving forward. And that's really a big challenge. And right now it's unclear what the options are going to be for those processes that require high temperature. Hydrogen is a potential solution in some instances, but still going to require a lot of changes in the equipment and additional investment. So, that to me is just, just a few examples of some of the challenges. But as far as competitiveness goes, New York on its own is not going to be able to solve all of this. It's great that we're taking steps in that direction, but if the rest of the country or the rest of the world doesn't come along with us, it's going to create some serious competitiveness issues down the road. And New York is already a high cost of doing business state in areas unrelated, things like workers' comp and taxes. So we need to be cognizant of that as we move forward and think about first the value that manufacturing brings to the economy, the desire to support the companies that are here that have made a commitment to New York, that employ hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers who all are part of the economy. And we need to factor in all of these things before we sort of just rush forward. So there's a lot to be considered in terms of cost and competitiveness.
Indeed. Matt, I know that you also have experience thinking about this in terms of the international competition and sensitivity to cost. Many companies in the state of New York are trade exposed, and I'm sure that you feel that to some extent.
Right. Our biggest competition is China, Indonesia, India, and Vietnam. Okay. So if you go on Amazon and you look at flatware, you're going to find Liberty Tabletop, and then every other flatware source is one of those 4 countries. So we don't compete actually in the United States because there are no other flatware manufacturers left in the United States. So that's what Heather mentioned is my biggest concern, is that if New York, and to coin a phrase, does this in a vacuum, you're going to have businesses that are mobile, that can move to Tennessee or Texas or move to China. They're going to move because it's going to be more profitable for them. And you have companies that are not mobile, our capital, our monuments, so to speak. We like to use that term in manufacturing. And they have a competitor in another area. They're not going to be able to compete, and it's not. So one of my fears of this is that, you know, we're trying to do what's best for the environment. I think we're trying to do the right thing. There are people that can argue both sides of it. And you know, if we dig our heels in too much, then it's gonna, you know, we're not getting anything done. But my fear is that you're going to have the companies that can't compete, that product is going to be moved to an area that doesn't care about the environment, and we know where that is. And then the net global carbonization is going to go up. So it's a multivariate equation, and the idea is to optimize the equation, not one variable. And that's what my concern. That's really where I'm concerned. You know, we're the only manufacturer in the state, so nobody else can say made in USA. I don't know what the price elasticity of forks, knives, and spoons is. Can we double our price? Can we triple our price and still sell what we're selling? I don't really know that. I would assume that we probably couldn't do that. So those are the concerns I have, is that trying to be a leader, but if nobody's connected to us on the train, we're going to be going by ourselves. That's really what my concern is.
Randy, is that shared by your members as well?
Yeah, I think both that Matt and Heather laid out, you know, what many companies in their leadership teams are expressing, this want to be actively engaged in the process, concerned about the environment, want to make sure we're making progress, but don't want to lose their competitive opportunities and, you know, and their businesses over this. They don't want to leave New York State. As Heather said, there are other cost considerations, but many of them have made a long-term commitment and want to be in New York State, believe in the workforce that they have, believe in what they're trying to accomplish. So I think many companies have expressed that concern. So it's just dual need here to both meet the challenge of the moment as well as to stay competitive. And I think the key is, when you're in a leadership position, is to be in conversation with everybody else at the federal level. What's going on at the federal level? How do we make sure we're working with the federal movement? And, you know, my sense is there could be, you know, meaningful movement there over the next few years, which I think would be advantageous to New York and its desired outcomes. On the international stage, how do we engage in the decarbonization conversation with our international partners? It really has to be a joint effort. As we often say, we need to do this together. Doing this alone will only sink our opportunities, I think, to be most effective in this transition. I mean, John has done a nice job, I think, of laying out sort of decade by decade what are some of the more immediate things that we can do. And I always think, let's focus on what we can do today. Let's give as much certainty as we can. Back to Heather's point, uncertainty is the great challenge. If you don't know the cost versus, you know, at least initial cost, you now can make plans. And you're not making plans within a year, you're making plans within decades, especially on capital side. But we also know that capital is more mobile than ever. That we used to think that, well, geez, if you make that investment, you're stuck here for 20 years. Not true in today's global and competitive environment. So I think it is a challenge. It is a big concern. That shouldn't stop us from having the conversations, but let's stay connected and let's be leaders, but not out front all alone. Because if we're out front all alone, I think we could see significant economic damage in New York State. And that would impact the whole state, not just the manufacturing sector.
Right. So this begs the question again, what can we do? What are actions that can be taken? I'd like to actually turn that to first John. How can we help avoid offshoring and leakage? How can we help support domestic production in state?
Right. Well, I think it is trying to understand, like, what can we do maybe now, right? Like, let's take a look at, things that are potentially implementable in the near term. And, a lot of, we do have state programs that are designed to try to capitalize on those opportunities in the relatively near term. So, NYSERDA actually has had one program around for really quite a while that, maybe has some new life. It's called our Flex Tech program. And really what this is that it's really an audit of a facility, and it tries to identify what are the potential energy efficiency opportunity spaces for a facility. And what it does is it provides the facility operator with, at least a map of where they can be going. And it allows the facility operator to then make decisions based on their kind of their capital cycle, where do they see long-term opportunities and where is a good investment space for the facility, making that more competitive in its market. And those, those audits we have seen, can be utilized by the facilities for really a number of years, right? It doesn't require 100% of the action happening immediately upon the completion of the audit. It really does try to make sure that it's an information resource that allows the facility owner to make advantageous decisions over a period of time. So that's something, helping try to identify, what we know are, say, energy efficiency opportunities, other types of improvement, process improvements that can be utilized over a short period of time, and just have that at the disposal of the facility. We do have, grant programs, again, that are tried to orient to where those opportunities will be. Certainly at all of the upstate utilities, they have quite sizable incentive programs for facilities to engage in energy efficiency. And it ranges from, really quite turnkey type of activities, whether it's lighting or heating and ventilation, things that are potentially like off the shelf, ready to implement, and people just need some support to get to that. But it also can be really quite customized to a particular outcome for a particular facility as well. And oftentimes, those are demonstration of a commitment by that manufacturer to New York State and staying in New York State, making big capital investments and doing it in a way that's also supportive of the state's energy and environmental goals. So certainly those are two kind of big key things that we can do. One interesting thing that also came through our recent advisory panel process that the Climate Action Council will be taking account of in their scoping plan development is also thinking about, like, how do we try to look to New York as an output for some products that we can think about? And, should New York be looking at the carbon intensity of products that are being manufactured, and whether it's looking at what potential state procurement might be, what is kind of general availability of products in the state economy. How do we work with regional partners, other states, to kind of build this low carbon product environment, and what are the procurement opportunity spaces we can do that. So I think that is something that the Climate Action Council will be looking at. And trying
that's very.
to for that.
I don't know how much flatware the state of New York buys, but they certainly buy a lot of concrete and aggregate. And so that could, in fact, be powerful to many manufacturers in this state. Before going to Luke, and I want to get his thought on some of this, I feel compelled to mention, we have to acknowledge that some of this is very far field to the state of New York. There are federal incentive programs and federal regulations that are coming down. There's also international tariffs that groups like the European Union are considering putting on carbon intensity and stuff. So there is, in fact, a whole bunch of material impacts that are coming in, as well as material opportunities that are coming in from around the country and around the world. Those also include potential investment opportunities from foreign entities and people outside of the state to come into the state, if in fact the state is able to provide that kind of leadership. Even in that context, though, I do worry that there are potential drawbacks for early actors, that it's possible to badfoot yourself as a company if you spend too much money and you're not rewarded or not incented appropriately. Luca, I don't know if you have any specific thoughts on that or related to the things we've discussed so far.
Yeah, no, I agree that, I think that, if I start with the silver lining here and the good news, I've heard Randy and comments as well on this, is that, businesses, all businesses, whether manufacturer or not, if they're going to have a future, they have to be very focused on evolving and adapting. And so basically with the carbon neutral future we're talking about it's just another adaption and adoption opportunity for us. I do think, one of the assumptions probably hasn't been stated in this panel, we should probably articulate clearly, is I guess one of the reasons we care so much about manufacturing is that I think from an economic point of view, it's what brings wealth to the state. So if we're a manufacturing powerhouse and we have more products leaving the state nationally and globally, it should transpire into more wealth being in the state. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind. And I guess the thing when I think to my own personal business, I too value these goals. I would like to see us move, and I think this is I guess another assumption as we think about a decarbon future. I think it's more of an electrification of our future. So, and I noticed, Heather said it early on. One of the challenges to the electrification is that that electricity has to be competitive. And so I think that when we look at this, and I think about partnership with the government, partnership with the utilities of New York, if we're all in it together, and manufacturing is key to our future and bringing wealth to the state, that electricity, especially as we keep moving towards, and we are going to move towards a carbon-free grid at some point down the road, we would like to adopt. So I think the risk to us is as we have to make those capital investments, and I wouldn't want to make the capital investment to move more of our operations to electrification, and only to find out that that electricity becomes our Achilles heel and makes us non-competitive, and actually ends up rewarding the slower movers.
Indeed, we could spend easily 90 minutes talking about just that one subject, but I'm keen to get sort of more thoughts in here. John had pointed out a handful of granting programs, procurement programs. Certainly, money is like voltage; it overcomes resistance, and it makes it easier to do all kinds of things. I wonder, Heather, from your perspective, or Matt, from your perspective afterwards, if there's other things that the state could do.
So first, I just want to just give a shout out for paper. We were talking about state procurement opportunities. I would love it if the state, and I think our manufacturers would love it if the state would buy all of its paper that it uses. And I know we're using less and less, but from New York paper manufacturers, and there are several in our state. As far as—
So, by the way, the paper manufacturers also need heat to do their job.
They do. And they're energy intensive and trade exposed. There are a lot of anti-competitive practices outside of the country that where countries are basically subsidizing their paper manufacturing and giving them a competitive advantage here in the US, to the disadvantage of our onshore local manufacturers. Again, topic for another day, but I think as far as what additional things can the state do to incentivize, one, it's very hard to understand or make recommendations without knowing what the cost is going to be, and what is the cost of electricity going to be. And so, to that end, the continued adding on of costs directly to the cost of electricity in order to subsidize programs really ends up becoming counterproductive, right? Because you're going to be adding costs to the overall cost of electricity just to subsidize certain programs, but it drives up the baseline costs at the front end. And so we need to really rethink that. We need to think about how we're going to look at providing direct subsidies, tax incentives, procurement preferences, maybe the development of some kind of market-based mechanism. But the bottom line on all of this is we need to have very clear market signals and some certainty, and uncertainty is going to drive investment out of the state. So hopefully that kind of answered your question. There's a lot of moving parts. Bottom line is, though, without addressing the cost issue, you really can't say what do we need to do to incentivize change. We don't know what it's going to cost.
Actually, Matt, before I get to you, I want to dwell on this topic for just a second, because it's come up in a number of the questions we've received from the audience about questions of the interconnects, about transmission build out, about tariffs. I want to remind the audience that renewable energy and clean energy have also associated health benefits, in particular in disadvantaged communities, which are noteworthy and important. It is also the case, though, that if power prices continue to go up, that's not exactly great for customers or manufacturers. And so before I go to you, Matt, I want to head back to John. Sort of how is NYSERDA thinking through these complicated issues associated with transmission build out, electrification, growing the load demands for electricity while also creating zero carbon generation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is quite an interconnected and complex system. So, and I think, the thing we have to also realize is that we're all in a process together, right? We're not going to be here in 2021 and understanding how everything is going to exactly look in, say, even 2040, when we're moving towards that zero emission and electricity system. The one thing that we have recently completed with the Department of Public Service is a very comprehensive study on what the power grid can look like to meet our 70% renewable electricity goal. And it's taking account of different resources and relative, kind of build outs of those resources over the next 10 years. What are going to be the transmission requirements, both from a bulk transmission system, as well as even looking to a degree at distribution level transmission interconnections and requirements on the distribution side, to make sure that that renewable energy, where it's being produced, can get to the load where it's serving. So certainly that power grid study did identify like what some near-term investment spaces might be and what the requirements will be over time. And it's just something that it's a first movement into how we think about that. And as we look at how renewable energy is going to get developed, as we look at electrification trends for both transportation and for buildings, we'll just be modulating and ensuring we're identifying what the supply side resources are, what the demand side evolutions are going to look like, as well as what those grid requirements are going to be, and all being sort of oriented to ensuring that we're maintaining the high levels of reliability that we maintain in New York State as we move forward. So all of these are considerations that are part of our analyses and will help to inform decision making as we see all of these trends taking place.
Yes, very much all hands on deck and all of the above kind of approaches. Matt, will that do it for you? Is that enough for you as a business? And what more can you do either on your own or working across sectors with other manufacturers?
Well, Dr. Friedman, nobody wants technology more than myself. Before I was making forks, knives, and spoons, I was an electrical engineer. So I understand this a little bit more than the average layperson. The holy grail would be a tank of hydrogen out back, and I have my own little fusion reactor, and I could charge my car, electrify my house, and it'd be a little just like a hot water heater. That may happen someday. But as far as working together, I think the state has to recognize that the manufacturers are very important. Nothing, and Heather mentioned it. It might be a little off topic, but Heather mentioned it earlier. If we've learned anything in the last 18 months, since less than maybe 15 months, is that if we don't have a diverse supply of products, goods and services, diverse from a global standpoint, we could be hung out to dry in about 5 minutes. And we've dealt with a lot of those problems, and it's been very difficult for everybody. But we're all connected in one of the things that we're all connected in New York State, we're all connected in the United States, and right now we're globally connected. So I think what the state needs to do for us is to help protect the manufacturing sector while trying to lead. And the federal government can do a lot of things that the state can't, like print money. They've done a little bit of that in the last few months. But also help us with, I think someone mentioned earlier that the EU is starting to look at the environmental impact of products that they import on their shores. I've always been an advocate for, the word tariff is a 4-letter word to a lot of people, but I would call it an environmental tariff. So if you are polluting your environment and dumping products on our shores, then you should pay for that. There should be an incentive to jump on the train with us. An incentive to use newer technologies and work to clean your environment, because no matter where we are on this globe, we affect each other, and it'll eventually come to bear here on our shores. So that's basically what I want to say about what the state and the feds could do for us.
No, thank you. And I applaud your vision of sort of a virtuous cycle in which we incent good behavior and clean the environment in doing so, and create better products that are more competitive globally and can withstand the threat of tariffs and so forth. In that context, Randy, to you, I'm think we have an object in front of us, the CLCPA, and that not only is, focused on certain environmental aspects, it's also focused on unions, it's focused on jobs. There are dimensions of this associated with communities of color and other disadvantaged and historically disadvantaged communities. How can the CLCPA, from your perspective, be a vehicle for positive outcomes? How can it be? How can it drive this kind of virtuous cycle we've been talking about?
Well, the best thing, in my opinion, by having the Climate Protection Act is that it's a process, that we don't sort of pass a law and say, do it. We have to go through, and actually, and I've been involved in many of these conversations over the many months, and I think they've been very productive to get individuals, essentially it's this panel routinely meeting, such as like this panel, not this panel, but having experts talk about specifically how do we address our challenges. And one of the things that's clear as we've talked about it is that there are going to be significant opportunities for green jobs and a greening economy. And New York State can use its purchasing power, like Heather pointed out, to be a part of making that happen. So we because New York State is a big spender in terms of specific products or services, as well as it can influence through its leadership the kinds of environmental future that we're trying to achieve. It can be a leader in its own space. And I think the green jobs is a huge opportunity, both in the energy generation as well as decarbonization. We've talked a little bit about that. There's much more to be said on that, I believe. Like I said, many of these topics could be their own 90-minute focused conversations, right?
Any of these topics.
These topics. So I think those all present real opportunity for New York State manufacturers. And a lot of small, medium ones could take advantage of that, being part of the supply chain, even if, for example, some of the primes may not be here originally, though I think we can get many primes in the green energy space to actually locate in New York, given our future. So I actually see huge opportunities here in terms of manufacturing and technology usage and adaptation. So I think by taking that into account, the opportunities here. The other thing is, I think it's really asset-based. NYSERDA is a huge opportunity and asset for New York State. Not other states don't have that fine institution that John's a part of that does great work. Over my 20 years of working with manufacturers and our members, we've seen the impact of having a international leader in looking at technologies, not just energy efficiency, but often overlooked. And John, you mentioned this earlier, is process efficiency. You can save a ton of outcomes and get a ton of energy savings. And actually, I think you'll see the same in decarbonization around process focus. So that often gets overlooked for technology focus. because we want the latest and greatest in technologies. I, like Matt, love the new technologies too, but sometimes it's the simplest process that allows us to accomplish outcomes. I know that we're going to spend a lot more time on this, but I really think there's huge opportunities both in the green and decarbonization economy specific to New York State manufacturing jobs.
Right. As much as I would like to spend a lot more time on this, we'll only be able to spend a little more time on this.
Yep.
I want to come back in a minute to the technologies, but before that, I want to sort of ask Luke, do you agree with what Randy said? Is the CLCPA a vector for green paying jobs in your sectors? Is it a way to get high wages and a cleaner environment? Is that, do you see the opportunities in there, or are there other challenges we haven't discussed yet?
No, I agree that, the movement in that direction, there will, clearly there's going to be the green jobs. I guess the other one is going to be the, what skills are involved in those jobs. Back to, one of the areas, again, if we do believe that this electrification is going to take place, it seems to me we're going to need a lot more people with those skills and technical skills. And they're not going to be, in my view, there's clearly going to be a lot of, 4-year degree type jobs, but I think there's going to be a real need for a lot of technicians to manage this installed base that's going to be put in place. And so it does beg the question, where are those skills going to be acquired? How are they going to be developed? Because just even before getting to the green economy as it stands today, one of our challenges is finding electricians, finding welders, finding people with these skills can be very, very challenging. So now with this moving to the green economy, it's going to even increase the demands for those types of technical skills. And so it does beg that question, where is that going to come from?
I do want to take a minute and talk more deeply about just transition, about disadvantaged communities. In part, we talk about these things entirely as negatives, and these communities certainly have their more than their fair share of health issues and environmental burdens. How can we envision in a decarbonization strategy a way to redress or fix some of these challenges? Simultaneously, we also need to see that these communities get real benefits beyond just the environmental benefits. They need secure jobs. They might want manufacturing themselves. I'm sure this is a topic the Business Council has thought about. And Heather, and then maybe John after that, if you'd weigh in just a bit on how you see these opportunities as well as these challenges.
Sure. So, first, I would say reducing or eliminating emissions altogether is going to have an impact on public health, including the communities that have been disproportionately negatively impacted in the past. And disadvantaged communities are a primary focus of the CLCPA and its implementation. I think 35% of the funding is going to be directed towards disadvantaged communities. I expect and anticipate it will also be a priority at the federal level. And as mentioned, if it's developed correctly and we really focus on workforce aspects of it, the transition to the green economy will create some opportunities for good paying jobs, economic development, increased local tax revenue. And so the implementation cost does matter. And how we decide to implement and where we focus our efforts is going to be very important. I think certainly it is the desire of everyone on this panel to ensure that we don't make the same mistakes that we've made in the past, and that we create sort of a level playing field for everyone in terms of the environment that they live in and the opportunities that they have. So I think all of that is important. The bottom line is, if manufacturing is driven from the state, there will end up being more disadvantaged and economically depressed communities. So we need to, make sure that we support manufacturing and welcome it, with the caveat that the goal is to try and create cleaner and more efficient processes that are affordable and competitive.
John, you've got, again, a somewhat different perspective from the state. How do you think about these communities, both in terms of how to improve their environment as well as provide other benefits and opportunities?
Yeah, well, maybe just, I think, when we think about, the impact of decarbonization work on communities, it's going to be the sum total of a lot of different types of activities that are happening, right? Clearly, if there are, industrial type facilities that are located adjacent or in communities that are disadvantaged, we want to make sure we're taking the right steps to keep the jobs there, but also make sure that we're allowing the community to realize the health impacts that come from reduced emissions from those activities. At the same time, we're also looking at emissions that come from transportation that may be in the vicinity, as well as also looking at the housing stock and how we are ensuring that we're upgrading and looking for the decarbonization activities, all of which are going to result in positive, or what we anticipate are going to be positive, health impacts to our communities. When we think about individual participation in the green energy economy, certainly there's a lot of focused attention on workforce training activities. And that can come in different forms, right? I think Luke was mentioning one thing about looking at skills and workers, and there's a lot of upskilling that we might need to think about from an existing workforce base, and ensuring that the manufacturing base employment we have is keeping up with new technology advancements or new approaches to the activity that's happening in New York. But we also want to make sure that we're creating what we can call career pathways, starting with very young people and creating, what might be internship programs or apprentice programs, on-the-job training programs. All of these, I think, wind up being extraordinarily valuable to the communities and the individuals that are looking for those pathways. And this is the way we can create them. The programs that NYSERDA has been implementing, the feedback coming from the sponsors of those programs is really extraordinarily high. The individual companies that are participating in these apprentice and on-the-job training programs find very high value with having these individuals that are looking and they're eager to learn and wanting to be part of the process. And
Right.
there are great outcomes coming from both sides on that.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. This goes back to something that Luke had mentioned earlier, that these communities are heterogeneous and not everybody wants to follow a given career trajectory. And by having these kinds of training programs and opportunities, you can help build the human capital and build careers while you do so. We're going to go to the audience in about 5 minutes. Before I do, I want to invite everybody on the panel here to discuss two topics which we have not yet really discussed. One of them is some of the specific technologies and innovations that we've been kicking around. I'm going to name a few in a moment. The other is the need for infrastructure. Sometimes these innovations and energy supplies are challenged to get to manufacturers because there's bottlenecks in the infrastructure for supply. These include things like green hydrogen, renewable natural gas. In the context of Luke's company, I'm thinking about novel formulations for concrete and cement and aggregate, these carbon to value pathways, things like new pozzolans that can substitute for fly ash. We've seen a lot of interest not only in hydrogen, but also in synthetic fuels made from hydrogen, in biofuels, many other of these pathways. And renewable natural gas, not just in the form of, from dairies as byproduct or landfills, but also, deliberately made from forestry wastes. There's an immense set of things that are out there. They're not all created equal in terms of cost, in terms of volume, in terms of reliability and availability. How do your enterprises think about these things? How do they really add value to your company? I'm going to start actually with Randy first and then go to Matt and Heather. Just to get your thoughts on both the innovations and the infrastructure.
Thanks. I think one of the key elements for me is, and it was mentioned just a few minutes ago by several of the other panelists is that do we have the skill sets to use these new technologies and the necessary infrastructure? So I do think that both you rightfully pointed out we'll need to use these emerging technologies, and we'll need to build an infrastructure so they're available to all manufacturers and actually the community at large. But how do we make sure that the skill sets exist to use these technologies, to implement them, to create the solutions? And we have a rich infrastructure, specifically around education in our state, that we ought to be tapping into. To include obviously our higher ed institutions, some of the most advanced learning institutions in the world, as well as great elementary and secondary schools. And we need to tap into that. We need to create career pathways, I believe, starting with STEM careers in elementary school, that we need to introduce people to these exciting opportunities that will be there for them, their parents to start with. In fact, we're working on some of those technologies and learning with other partners, starting with learning for parents and students in elementary school. So we have to start early, and then of course, reskill, upskill. That has to always be the case. And we have to get good at the continuous learning process. So let's not forget the human side of this, but you've mentioned many of the technologies. There's many more out there that are being explored. One of the big challenges will be infrastructure implementation, not only for electricity, but for these other technologies.
Yeah, infrastructure is a particular challenge as well. Many low-income communities, disadvantaged communities simply don't want the infrastructure, and that creates a challenge for siting. It is also the case, though, that companies like Plug Power, which is a manufacturer in New York, make some of these technologies. Opportunities for state-based manufacturing in these as well. How about, I want to actually move next to Matt and then maybe to Heather on this same question, innovation and infrastructure.
Right. I think one of the things that is important to me, I mean, obviously I'm not going to be around forever, but my children and grandchildren, I would hope that they'd like to live in a beautiful state like New York State. There's a reason I stay here. I could have moved out of this state probably 10 different times, and I fought to stay in upstate. I call it central New York. It's really not upstate because I'm not in Westchester County, sorry, but just a coin of phrase. But I think obviously I call it the Green New Deal for New York State is important legislation, but I think to use that as a lever to not only say that we're going to try to move to these technologies, why don't we think about being the center of these technologies? Why doesn't New York State become the epicenter of, and forget about the United States, the world epicenter for the ability to create hydrogen energy? Let's think about I mentioned it earlier, nuclear fusion, basically building little suns in New York State, and think about leapfrogging anyone else in the world so it would become a magnet where people would want to come to. Okay, and because I know that when I talk to some of my fellow business people, this is a change that's very daunting. We have a lot of other challenges in our business outside of just the energy side. We've got a trade gap. We're looking at automation. We don't have the trades and the skilled labor. Right now, we're having trouble getting anybody to even apply for a job. So let's turn this whole discussion around and think about how we could be the innovation state of the world, and the people from all over the world would come to us to create green jobs in their areas. So I didn't even think about this subject until Dr. Friedman, you mentioned that, but I think that's a really good opportunity for you. Talk about creating green jobs. The way we're going to do that is we're going to create a magnet for people. People are going to want to come to live in New York State to be part of the solution.
Well, and I know that is something that NYSERDA is very actively working on. I'll come to John in a minute, but Heather, I'm sure that vision is one the Business Council likes as well. How do you think about innovation and infrastructure as a magnet for attracting industry to the state?
Absolutely critical, and there are a couple things that don't sometimes get included in infrastructure that ought to be. We have some of the finest higher education institutions in the world in New York, in particular in upstate and central New York, where I am from myself. So we need to figure out how to leverage these assets that we have and use them as centers to develop energy innovative solutions as far as energy goes, but also recognize that this is part of the infrastructure of the state, and we should be using it to forward our agenda here and try and encourage people when they start developing new technologies to stay here and develop those technologies here. I mean, Plug Power is a great example of that. There are many others. The Northeast has some of the highest GDP per capita out of the entire country, and part of that is because of manufacturing and higher ed, and we should make sure we keep it that way.
I would add to that Central and Upstate New York also have an incredible density of skilled labor. They have an incredible density of people with advanced degrees. These are underutilized, I think, in the state. And I know that John sort of thinks about these resources in a very real way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is sort of like a conversation music to NYSERDA's ears, right? So, and where I might also suggest, I mean, like, so certainly NYSERDA focuses very heavily kind of on that energy technology research and development. That is an enormous opportunity space in New York, and certainly, many stories of success, and it is a great infrastructure that we're able to build on. The capacity in New York really spans way beyond just energy, though, right? I mean, there are industries of every type, all of which are going to be innovating, all of which are going to need to navigate through a decarbonized economy and finding new products, new services that will be providing value to that economy, as well as the jobs, as well as the other benefits that come with doing that. So I couldn't agree more with the thought that, New York being kind of just a center of innovation in any number of manufacturing and industrial activities is certainly open to us. And I think the way that we are going to be thinking about kind of our, climate and decarbonization planning will try to account for, the need to kind of open the arms beyond just clean energy technology advancement, but how do we think about the opportunity spaces that we can create across all industry types, and make sure that New York is really an attractive home to be able to set up shop and provide value to the state.
So I want to get to a couple of the audience questions in a moment, but Luke, we haven't given you a chance to weigh in on any of this. How do you see these issues?
No, I think one of the challenges, I guess we're a good example of it, is, it's not only, I like these ideas, obviously. It would be great to make New York the epicenter of technology development, green technology. But I think we are representative of a small to mid-sized company. By definition, we're not a technology company. We're an adopter of technology, and so we are reliant basically on others to do the innovation. But we are highly motivated both by the goal of becoming less carbon intensive, and also by just everyday efficiency, looking for opportunities to be more competitive. So I think that's how the landscape looks to us. And so it would be, great news to, and I like the thinking here that, don't look at this as a burden, look at this as an opportunity, and this could really transform and enhance New York in substantial ways.
We really shouldn't waste this crisis. I completely agree.
Yeah.
In that context, even as an adopter and user of energy services, whether they're fuels or electricity, you are certainly sensitive to price. You're certainly sensitive to reliability. And a lot of these issues come back to electricity. And again, we've received a number of questions about electricity. I want to sort of try to bundle together two of them. One of them is, of course, climate change is adding burdens to electricity generation. It's making, in some ways, it's challenging the reliability of transmission systems. It's as is, for example, the shutting down of nuclear power plants, the retiring of peakers, and so forth. There are questions about reliability and costs that come into that. At the same time, we are seeing renewable costs dropping ferociously. And NYSERDA, of course, is part of the team that's building this marvelous offshore wind farm opportunities that are going to be so important to the state. At the same time as we're seeing those costs dropping, we're seeing the power prices rising for manufacturers. This is a challenge. You know, how can we sort of tackle this in a sensible way? What mixture of incentives and construction and emissions reduction are going to deliver the mail for manufacturers in the state? Just to anybody in the panel on that.
I can try. So you're asking the bit of the holy grail question there. You know, I think there is. I think it's a desired outcome from all, right? It's not as if that we should be thinking about decarbonization strategies and means to support decarbonization activities as kind of purely additive to things that we want to otherwise be doing. That's really kind of not the thing. We need to make sure we're weaving kind of the environmental outcomes that we know are necessary for us to put us on a path to. And how can New York and New York-based industries, the New York-based economy look to find opportunity by doing that? And I think that is the challenge, making sure that we are putting forward activities that are designed to be cost reducing, right? We are looking for scale-based activity. We don't want, you know, we find things stay expensive when we take small incremental approaches to things. So we want to be approaching the opportunity space in a cost reducing manner. And in the way that we're helping to support that over the short term, you know, we have to be sure we're managing what the impacts are across the board to ratepayers, to kind of the tax base, you know, and try to make sure that as we are looking to account for the activities that we're looking to put into place, that we're looking at all of kind of the tools in the toolbox that we have to make sure that we are not creating kind of burdensome approaches in the way that we are orienting ourselves to get to the outcomes that we see as beneficial.
So John, you just promised us that the electricity costs are going to go down, right? Thank you. I just wrote that down. I wrote it down.
Right, but this is again the exact challenge. We see the cost for renewables dropping and the cost for electricity rising, and that just reflects, it's not bad faith, it's just the complexity in the system, actually. That you really have to tackle lots of different pieces of this. Randy, you wanted to expand on that?
Yeah, there's, I think we know just in this conversation and so many I've had, there's no silver bullet here, but there is using the complexity to looking at from the sort of the implementer side on the manufacturing side would suggest that what you're trying to do is, you know, pilots that then you scale to reduce cost. That's typically what goes on in making any product. So John's right. One part of our challenge here is to how do we get upon and use those technologies in a small way to demonstrate they are scalable and useful. And what's interesting is, you know, oftentimes this sort of thought that, you know, cost and, you know, and efficiencies maybe aren't number one, but they're always number one to manufacturers because they operate in a competitive climate always. And I think that makes them really good implementers of these projects. That's why NYSERDA's approach, often pilots that then scale, makes sense. And it makes sense because manufacturers think that way. You know, I want to do it in a small way, but I have to be able to scale it. Otherwise, it's way too expensive for my customer. The same can be said of decarbonization, energy efficiency, and the other necessary outcomes for manufacturers. So again, I think we want to use the natural thinking, understanding of manufacturers to be successful in this space. And having good partners, by the way, this is a public-private, nonprofit approach. There is no, well, have the private sector do it, or have the governmental sector do it, have the nonprofit or extra governmental sectors do it. We got to be all in on it. In terms of all
it's a team
sectors.
sport.
It's a team sport for all. We need to be on the same team if we're going to get there.
And again, I'm a big fan of pilots. I've spent a certain amount of my career going from 0 to 1 on things. And once you have one thing that you can learn from, you can get better and so forth. It is also, again, not reasonable to expect the private sector to take those risks unilaterally. It's good to have a partner like NYSERDA or others in civil society who they can use to defray those risks, and also, again, support the human capital component. We've really only got a minute or two left. I do want to end on time. I just want to provide an opportunity for people to make very brief, let me underscore very brief, sort of closing thoughts. Let's start first with Heather and then Matt and Luke.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I mean, I think in no particular order, I think we need to continue to value the contribution manufacturers make to the economy as as sort of a first thought. I think we need to leverage the assets that we have in terms of higher education and the strength of our energy network in the state. And I think most importantly, but very importantly, we need to rethink policies that add or pile on costs to electricity that don't necessarily relate to reliability, that don't relate to the strengthening of the system, and that are used for things that end up driving the costs up even more. So it's counterproductive to do that. So we need to keep our thoughts open, our minds open as far as what available fuel sources there are, not foreclose anything, but always be mindful that cost actually does matter.
Indeed, hearkening back to where we started. Matt.
Yes, quickly, I think I mentioned it earlier, but in the last 15 months, I think the United States citizen has understood the importance of manufacturing for a variety of reasons. I'm going to be leaving this meeting, and we're going to be talking to people in Washington about Trade Act compliance, about different things on Made in USA. This administration, for those of you who may or may not know, is still carrying the manufacturing water for the previous administration. The people, boots on the ground, are committed to manufacturing in the United States. And I think in this discussion sort of turned full circle for me. As Heather mentioned, manufacturers need to be supported, okay, by everyone, and understand that when you make things, you're creating wealth for the state. It's a fact. So if we can do this the right way, we may actually end up as a magnet, like we mentioned, that benefits manufacturers and a showcase for the rest of the world. So if we go at it from that angle, rather than saying we're just going to do A or B, and we weave our way through and try to find what the best way is, what we're doing right now may not be the best way. But if we're able to learn and shift on the fly, it could end up being a really an economic boom for New York State. Thank you.
Luke, super quick, you get the last word, and then back to Julie.
Okay, thank you. No, I'm very encouraged by the discussion. I did like the fact that everyone does recognize that competitiveness matters, and we just need to stay focused on finding that right balance between a decarbonized future and a competitive future.
Outstanding. Thanks again to all of our panelists. This was a terrific discussion. Julie, back to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your promptness. I'm very impressed on that. But I really want to thank, sorry, the screen just moved, Dr. Friedman, John Williams, Luke Clement, Randy Walken, Matt Roberts, and Heather Britchetti. Many of you are my friends from Albany, so thank you so much for participating here today. And I notice every time they add some screen, it takes away your screen. We hope everyone learned something this morning about decarbonizing our manufacturing center. I want to thank again our partners, the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia Law School, our sponsor Con Edison, and to all of our panelists for this great discussion today. And of course, all of our audience members for participating. If you tuned in late or you want to rewatch this video, it will be posted on our YouTube page at youtube.com/NYLCV. As I mentioned at the opening, this is part of our series on the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. So stay tuned for more forums like this one. And if you want to catch any of the previous forums we held, the entire series is available on our website at nylcvef.org/CLCPA forum series. Very, very clever. Follow us on @NYLCV on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for updates. And if you're not on our lists, please sign up at www.nylcvef.org. I want to thank everybody so much and have a great week.
Thank you again.
Thank you.